Wang Da, by the way, Yi Xin is a gambler. One day, while he was lying down to rest, he suddenly saw his deceased gambling friends, Wang Da and Feng Jiu, coming in and inviting him to gamble. At this time, Li Xin also forgot that the two were ghosts and happily followed them. After leaving home, Wang Da wanted to invite Zhou Ziming from the same village. Feng Jiu led Li Xin one step ahead and came to the temple in the east of the village. After a while, Zhou Ziming followed Wang Da. Feng Jiu took out the cards and the four of them agreed to gamble. Li Xin said, "I came in a hurry and didn't bring any money. I failed to live up to your invitation. What should I do?" Zhou Ziming also said that he didn't bring any money. Wang Dadao, Huang Ba from Yanzi Valley is a loan shark. Let's go borrow money from him together. We will definitely be able to lend it to you. So the four of them went to borrow money together. Walking wanderingly, we arrived at a large village in an instant. I saw a series of high-profile houses. Wang Da pointed to a gate and said, "This is Mr. Huang's house." Just as he was about to go in, an old servant came out of the door, and Wang Da told him his purpose. The old servant went back to report. After a while, he came out and said that he had invited Wang Da and Li Xin to meet him on the order of the young master. When I went in, I saw that Mr. Huang was about 18 or 19 years old. He spoke kindly and smiled. He took out a bunch of money and gave it to Li Xin, and said, "I know you have always been loyal and honest. I can lend you money. I can't trust Zhou Ziming." Wang Da tactfully interceded for Zhou Ziming, and Mr. Huang agreed to borrow it, but it must be signed by Li Xin as a guarantee. Li Xin refused, but Wang Da encouraged and persuaded him. Li Xin had no choice but to reluctantly agree, and Mr. Huang took out another bunch of money and gave it to him. After coming out, Li Xin handed the money to Zhou Ziming and told Mr. Huang what he said again, which meant that he would definitely repay it in the future. The four of them came out of Yanzi Valley and saw a woman walking towards them. It turned out to be the daughter-in-law of the Zhao family in the same village. This woman has always been fierce, often contentious, and scolding. Feng Jiu said, "There is no one here, let's play tricks on this shrew." So he and Wang Da caught the woman and pulled her into the valley. The woman cried and screamed in fear, and Feng Jiu grabbed the soil and stuffed it into her mouth. Zhou Ziming agreed and said, "Such a shrew should have a peg in her vagina." Feng Jiu then peeled off her pants and thrust a long stone in. The woman seemed dead and silent. When the four of them saw this, they quickly dispersed. They gathered together in the temple again and started gambling. Betting from noon to night, Li Xin won a big victory, but Feng Jiu and Zhou Ziming lost completely. Li Xin gave all the money he won plus interest to Wang Da and asked him to return it to Mr. Huang on his behalf. Wang Daoyan gave some to Feng Jiu and Zhou Ziming, and the gambling continued. Not long after gambling, heard people shouting and noisy outside the temple. A man ran in and shouted, "The city god has personally arrested the gamblers and is already outside the door." The faces of the four people turned pale. Li Xin saw that the opportunity was not good, threw down the money, climbed over the wall and escaped. The remaining three people who were looking after the money were all caught and tied up. When I came out of the temple, I saw a god riding a horse, with a group of gamblers tied behind the horse, more than 20 people in total. Before dawn, I had already walked to a city, opened the city gate, entered, and came to the government office. The city god sat down facing south, called the prisoners into the lobby, took a roster in his hand, and named them one by one, ordering all the prisoners to be gambled. The gambler's middle finger was chopped off with an axe. He was also ordered to paint the gambler's eyes red and black, respectively, and parade him through the streets 3 times. After the tour, the escorting guards asked for bribes from the gamblers and promised to wipe the color from their eyes. Everyone was vying to give money, but Zhou Ziming refused, saying he had no money. The officer wanted to send him home to pick him up, but Zhou Ziming refused. The guard pointed at him and cursed, "You are really a piece of iron that cannot be fried." He handed over his hand and walked away. Zhou Ziming went out of the city to go home alone. On the way, he wet his sleeves with saliva and wiped his eyes as he walked. "I walked to the river and took a photo in the water, but the color was still there. I washed it with water, but it couldn't be washed away, so I had to go home regretfully." Before that, the Zhao family's daughter-in-law went back to her parents' home for business and had not returned after dark. The husband went to pick her up, and when he walked to the mouth of the valley, he saw his wife lying on the side of the road. It looked like he had encountered a ghost. He hurriedly dug out the mud from his mouth and carried it home. The woman gradually woke up, and her husband realized that there was something in her vagina, so he slowly pulled out the long stone. The woman told what happened on the road. Zhao was furious and hurried to the county government office to sue Li Xin and Zhou Ziming. The Yamen officers came to Li and Tuesday's home to arrest them. Seeing that Li Xin had just woken up from sleep, Zhou Ziming was still asleep, as if dead. It couldn't have been them. Upon hearing this, the county magistrate beat Zhao and his wife severely for false accusation, and the couple could not defend themselves. The next day, Zhou Ziming woke up. One of his eye sockets suddenly turned red and the other black. He screamed that his finger hurt. When he looked carefully, he found that the bone of his middle finger had been broken, and only the skin was connected. A few days later, half of it was broken. The finger fell off. The color in the eyes penetrates deeply into the flesh, making everyone who sees it smile. One day, Wang Da came to collect debts again. Zhou Ziming just said loudly that he had no money, and Wang Da left angrily. After asking about it, his family members found out the reason, and they all advised him to be merciless and to pay back the money. Zhou Ziming insisted on refusing and said, "Nowadays, officials protect those who default on debts and refuse to repay them. There should be no difference between the underworld and the underworld, let alone gambling debts." The next day, two ghost servants came and said that Wang, the young master, has filed a complaint with the city god, accusing Zhou Ziming of defaulting on debts and intending to arrest him for interrogation. Li Xin also saw ghost guards coming at home and took him to testify, so Zhou and Li suddenly died. They met outside the village and saw Wang Da and Feng Judu there. Li Xin said to Zhou Ziming, "You are still red-eyed. How dare you go to see the official?" Zhou Ziming still said that he had no money to pay bribes. Li Xin knew that he was always greedy, so he said, "Since you want to cheat, I have to ask Mr. Huang to pay you back." They went to Mr. Huang's house again, and Li Xin explained the reason first. Mr. Huang disagreed and said, "Who owes the debt and asks you to pay back the money?" Li Xin came out and told Zhou Ziming, discussing with him how to provide the money himself and let him use it to pay off the debt. Zhou Ziming became so angry that he even attacked Mr. Huang. The ghost servant then arrested the young master's servants together. Not long after, he came to the government office and saw the city god. The city god angrily scolded Zhou Ziming and said, "You are a scoundrel. The color in your eyes is still there. Why are you defaulting on your debt?" Zhou Ziming confessed, "It was Mr. Huang who lent me the interest loan to seduce me. I went to gamble and was punished by my master." The city god called the old servant of the young master's family to come up and said angrily, "Your master is having a gambling party. How dare you collect debts?" The old servant argued, "When I borrowed the money, the young master didn't know that they were going to gamble. The young master lives in Yanzi Valley, and the casino is in Guanyin Temple, more than 10 miles apart. The young master has never opened a casino." When the city god heard about it, he looked at Zhou Ziming and said, "You borrowed money and refused to pay it back, and you even made up charges. You are the worst of all people." He was beaten to death. Zhou Ziming hurriedly complained that Mr. Huang's loan interest was too heavy. The city god asked, "How much have you paid back?" The old servant said, "You haven't paid back a penny." The city god said angrily, "The principal has not been repaid, so why talk about interest?" He was given a heavy beating of 30, and he was immediately taken home to get the money to repay the debt. The ghost servant asked for a bribe and took him home. He was not allowed to be resurrected immediately, but he was tied up in the toilet and entrusted to his family. In his dreams, the family hurriedly burned 20 strings of paper money. Once the fire was extinguished, it turned into 2 taels of gold, or 2,000 coins. Zhou Ziming used gold to pay off his gambling debts and bribed the ghost servants with money before he was released and returned home. After I woke up, the injured area on my buttocks was swollen and dripping with pus and blood. It took several months to heal. Later, the Zhao family's daughter-in-law did not dare to curse in the street anymore. But Zhou Ziming, despite missing a finger and having red and black eyes, continued to do so. From this, we can see that gamblers are really not human beings. Yishi said, "The reason why things are unfair in the world is that officials often go too far. In the past, some rich and powerful people issued usurious loans and used double the interest to seize the children of good families. People were afraid of them and did not dare to express their anger. Otherwise, right as soon as the post was sent to the officials, the officials would bring out the law and always protect the rich families who were lending money. So in the past, those local officials became servants of the big families. Later, people with vision saw this shortcoming and took great measures to correct it. So there are a person borrows large amounts of money from others to make money by doing big business. He eats well and wears well, builds a house and buys good land. He forgets where the capital came from. When the creditor asked for money, he glared at him and complained to the government. The official said, "I will not be a servant." This is really a bit like the lazy monk Mingzan in the early years. He said that he did not have time to wipe the tears of ordinary people. So I said, the former official flattery, today's officials are wrong. Of course, those who flatter are killed, but those who are wrong are really hateful. Moneylenders charge relatively small interest rates. How can they only benefit the rich? In the reign of Kangxi, Jiang Xinian was appointed as the magistrate of Ziquan, and he hated gambling the most. He punished gamblers by smearing their faces and parading them through the streets, which was like the criminal law of the underworld. Except that they didn't cut off their fingers, so gambling was still punished. As an official, he seems to be very familiar with the hook and distance method used by ancient humans to reveal hidden secrets. He was busy handling official affairs. Whenever he had some free time, he would ask everyone who came to the court where they lived, how old they were, how many people they had in their family, and what they did for a living. After asking him, gave him some advice and asked him to leave. There was a person who came to hand in the receipt after paying the tax. He thought that nothing happened, so he wanted to withdraw after paying the receipt. Zhang Gong stopped him and asked him carefully, "Why are you gambling?" The man tried his best to defend himself, saying that he never knew how to gamble. Zhang Gong said with a smile, "You also have gambling equipment in your waist." After searching, it turned out that it was indeed there. At that time, people thought that the great master was really a god, but until later, they did not know what spells he used.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.